Luke chapter 6. Human needs over rigid rules. The living room's ceiling fan spins quietly, casting steady shadows over 4 open Bibles, empty coffee mugs, and scattered highlighters. Rachel leans forward from her armchair, tapping the margin of her open text. "Let's start right in the dirt of the grainfields," she says, looking across at the other 3 women. Luke chapter 6 opens with the disciples doing something as basic as eating when they are hungry, yet they are being stalked. The text says the Pharisees were watching them. Think about that environment. Walking through life with an institutional lens constantly tracking you, waiting for a single misstep. Chloe shifts on the rug, her notebook resting on her knees. It's pure surveillance culture, Rachel. The scribes and Pharisees aren't there to learn. They are running an audit on behavior. When they ask, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" they are using technical, post-biblical scribal definitions of harvesting to bypass the human element of hunger. They care more about protecting their legalistic sandbox than the fact that people are starving right in front of them. But it's terrifying to break a rule when you've been taught your whole life that compliance equals safety, Sarah says, her voice tightening slightly as she looks down at her pages. When Jesus answers them by bringing up David eating the holy bread of the presence, he does something that completely scrambles my old conditioning. He doesn't say the rules don't matter. He says human preservation matters more. He's showing that God's original intent for the law was never meant to be a weapon that starves people. Grace nods slowly, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. And then he seals it by standing in the synagogue on another Sabbath, looking at the man with the withered right hand. Luke gives us that precise medical detail, the right hand, the hand of a man's livelihood, his dignity, completely dried up. The system saw that man as a trap to catch Jesus. Jesus saw him as a person who needed restoration. When he asks them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to destroy it?" he completely exposes their hearts. Their silence was damning. They would rather let a man stay broken for another 24 hours than have their institutional checklists disrupted. Rachel moves her hands expressively as she takes over the thread. Look at what happens immediately after that confrontation. The text says the religious leaders were filled with fury, discussing what they might do to Jesus. So what does he do? He climbs a mountain and spends the entire night in prayer. He doesn't fight them on their terms. He pulls away into total alignment with the Father, and when morning comes, he establishes a new infrastructure. He chooses the 12, and then he does something beautiful. He descends the mountain to a level place. That spatial shift changes everything, Chloe says, leaning forward excitedly. He doesn't stay up on the peaks of elite theology. He steps down to the flat ground where the multi-ethnic crowd from Judea, Tyre, and Sidon are all bottlenecked. Before he ever opens his mouth to teach the sermon on the plain, he touches them. He heals their diseases and extracts their unclean spirits indiscriminately. He meets the raw, somatic chaos of humanity on equal footing. Sarah traces a line of text with her pen, her eyes scanning the blessings and woes. This is where the cognitive dissonance hits me hard. He looks at this desperate crowd and says, "Blessed are you who are poor, you who are hungry now, you who weep now." And then he drops the woes on the rich, the full, and the popular. Everything my past church environments flagged as signs of God's blessing, wealth, comfort, a good reputation, Jesus flags as a spiritual liability. He's tearing down the framework that says outward prosperity equals rightness with God. Because prosperity makes us independent, Sarah, Grace observes, her voice gentle but firm. When you are full, you don't think you need a physician. But Jesus is redefining right and wrong from the inside out. He moves straight from the blessings into the hardest ethical commands in the New Testament. Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, turn the other cheek, and lend without expecting anything back. That is not standard human behavior. You cannot manufacture that kind of love through sheer willpower or rule following. Chloe looks up from her notes, nodding in agreement. Exactly. He's stripping away our ability to hide behind performance. He even gives us the parable of the speck and the log in the eye. It's a hilarious piece of imagery, but it's lethal. We spend all our systemic energy managing the minor infractions of people around us, while walking around with a giant structural beam blinding our own vision. We default to judgment because judging others is always easier than auditing our own interior spaces. That's the pivot to the tree and the fruit, Grace says, her eyes anchoring the group's focus. Verse 45 says the mouth speaks out of the abundance of the heart. The heart is a storage facility. Whatever you accumulate in there under the surface is exactly what is going to manufacture itself into reality when you are squeezed. You can't gather grapes from thorn bushes, no matter how much religious vocabulary you use. The ultimate test of who we are isn't the performance we put on in the synagogue. It's the fruit people actually experience when they interact with us under pressure. Rachel smiles warmly, looking around the circle as the evening light fades outside. And that brings us straight to the final layout of the 2 builders. Both houses looked exactly the same from the outside. They probably had the same design, the same appearance. The difference wasn't visible until the river torrent hit. The man who survived was the one who dug deep, broke through the dirt, and locked his foundation directly into the rock. Jesus explicitly defines that foundation as the person who hears his words and does them. It's not about intellectual agreement or keeping a flawless checklist. It's about active, daily, radical execution of his compassion. That's the only life that survives the storm.